Welcome back to this guide on how to create REST APIs with .NET version 6. Just to summarize what we have one solution right now that has 3 projects. So the first project I call API. It's an HTTP server. This HTTP server gets requests from HTTP clients like browsers and Postman, and then it responds back with an HTTP response. Then we have one project called Entities that has one model. This one model is called Product. And then we have one project called Infrastructure that is responsible for sending database queries. We're interested in creating right now is what's called data transfer objects. So this system is going to become a distributed system once we also have a front-end program. Right now, all we have is the back-end program, right? But in a couple of weeks, we have a client program that can request data from this solution we have here. And that means sometimes when that client program requests some data or it sends some data to us, it doesn't always 100% correspond with the models we have as our entities. So right now, the only entity model we have is the one called Product. And Product has 2 general functionalities. Either you can get a list of all products, or we can create a product. But the thing is, when we create a product, the data that we need to create the product is not 100% corresponding with what is the properties of the product. So if we go to the product, we see that we have this ID as first property. But if we open up Swagger, let's just go to the API, write .NET, run. And then we will see the request body that we have when we send a request to our REST API. So we're just gonna let it build this program right now. And now the program is running and we open up localhost port 5001 and we say advanced, accept the risk and continue. This is just our own server, so it doesn't matter. And then we go to Swagger. So Swagger is giving us an overview of the endpoints that we have. So we have something to get our products, and then we have something to create a product. And if we look at this one, we have an example of the values we would send to create a product. And the first thing we see is that we have this ID here. But ID is something we create inside of a database. So the model for the product is actually not representative of what we need to create the product. If this was the model, it would be more representative of what we need. So it's not a big problem that it is asking for the ID. But we might end up at a place where we have so many properties which we don't need in order to perform some kind of action. So what we are saying to the client is supply us with all of these values, but then in the REST API here, if we go to the controller and we say we create a product, well, the only thing we really need to create the product is the name of the product and the price of the product. So we can simplify the request body by creating a new model specifically for making this one request or any particular request. So in essence, what a data transfer object is creating a new class. And that new class is the model specific for exchanging some data between the front end and the back end. And let's just make this model quick. So we can just make it inside of this API project here. Let's go to add, and then we'll make a new directory. So that's just a folder, and we can just call it DTOs for data transfer objects. And if we go and add a new class to this DTOs folder, call it PostProductDTO.cs. Now we have this class here, and we'll just add the properties that we're interested in sending when we create a product. Say yes to adding this to Git, and we'll say public string name. So we need a name for creating a product. And what we also need is the price, public int price get set. And we don't write ID, because the ID is not what we want from the client when we want to create a new product. We just need the name and the price, and then when we return the product back to the client, we're gonna give them a real product item. So what does that look like? Well, what we do is we go into this create product endpoint here, and then we say, instead of requesting product, we create the PostProductDTO here, and we just call it DTO. Now, the problem we have now is that we still validate a product, and we still have to write a product to the database using an actual product, and not just a PostProductDTO. So there are two ways of handling this, and I'm going to show you the old-fashioned way first. That is creating a simple product using just normal instantiation of a product. New product. And then we say product.name equals DTO.name. Product.price equals DTO.price. And now it's working again. So let's just close down the program, and then we run the program again. I just fast forward through the building phase, and now we're back into Swagger, and we can send a request here, and I put the price to 10 because there's a validator, right? And we can execute, and we now get a product back. Not a DTO back, but just a product. That's all right for now. So we could also choose to get a separate object back as the response, but we're all right with just having a normal product object. There are some adjustments we would like to make in code right now, and this is because we're still using a validator. But the problem is that we're still just validating our original product, but we're always interested in validating exactly what the client is sending us. So we actually need to make a validator to the DTO and not the actual product. And the way we change this is very easy. We just go into a product validator here, and then we say PostProductDTO. So now this is a validator for DTO and not the actual object. So we can go back into the controller, and what we can do now is we can just move this line right here. First thing we want to do inside of this method is we want to validate the DTO. So we move these two lines. Just go a line down. And we put the DTO in here. And then once we've validated the DTO, create our own product. And then if the validation is correct, we could, of course, this one in here if you wanted to. This might be slightly more logical because as soon as the validation fails, we're interested in ending this function as soon as possible, so we don't start making all kinds of actions. The validation is invalid. But this is, of course, not the most efficient way to write code. because we're going to have a lot of repetition. Right now, we need to make a new product. We need to take all these properties and we set them equals to properties of the DTO. But luckily for us, there is a library for this. So before I showed you the old-fashioned version, this was the old-fashioned version. Now I'm going to show you the new version of doing this. So we're going to go add a NuGet package, and it's called AutoMapper. And we have it right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add this to the API. Notice how we're not adding the AutoMapper to the other projects. So right now, entities has no knowledge about the DTO object, and infrastructure doesn't know about the DTO object either. But that's of course because they're never going to see a DTO. Only the point where the client gets to communicate with our HTTP server is where we're going to use the AutoMapper. So after a brief installation, you can now see we have AutoMapper installed because there's a little minus sign here. And we can start to make our configuration. Before we can use AutoMapper, it must be configured. So the way we write this is we would make the configuration and we can just call it config. So we say var config equals new mapper configuration. And then inside of this mapper configuration, we have this little arrow expression. Say conf create curly brackets here. And then we take this little conf variable we created here and we write create map. And inside of the diamond brackets, we put first the DTO and then we put the original entity class. So we have PostProductDTO and then we have product. And it might say, do you want to import this? And we say, yeah, we want to import this, and write a semicolon here. And before we can start to use this, the configuration must be added. So we have something called builder. And this builder needs to add a ton of stuff. And it also needs to add the configuration. So what we do is we say builder, services, add singleton. And then inside of this parenthesis, we need to add the mapper. And in between the configuration and the adding of singleton, we need to write var mapper equals config dot create mapper, like this. And then we take this mapper object here, and then we just put into this singleton. So if you remember from your first year at EASV, there is a pattern called the singleton pattern. And this is just the pattern that we're using for the mapper. And this mapper is capable of transforming DTO to a product. And that's exactly what we need. So what we do now is we go back into our controller. And the controller needs to know about the mapper. So what we can do here is we can write private IMapper, and then we just call it mapper with a little underscore. And then inside of the constructor here, let's just import this. Say IMapper, and it's a parameter, so we don't write underscore. Then we say instance variable mapper equals mapper. So we're injecting this mapper into our controller. And we're doing this from the program.cs file when we're adding the singleton here. So now we can use this instance variable of the AutoMapper. So if we go down to this create product here, we just say mapper. So now we can use this mapper object that we just created, and then we say dot map, and then we do diamond brackets, and then we say product. Then we put the DTO into this one. So this is how we would create a new product. We can just delete this one up here, and then we say product. That's what we just created. So now we can write it in one line. And the thing is, when you use DTOs, you're going to create a lot of these DTOs mappings different places in your code. So it's good to have some kind of library that can help you to write these as one-liners. And also, if you have some more complex mapping logic, this AutoMapper is very good for also handling that. So you don't need to write very many lines every single time. You need to transform a data transfer object into your original entity object.